Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book here in Houston. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on Facebook. I am thrilled to be here with Cindy Burnett from Thoughts from a Page and Matt Goldman to celebrate his new release, Dead West. Yes, Dead West. Sorry, it was backwards in my picture, and I was like, okay, so introductions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cindy for the conversation. Matt Goldman is a playwright and Emmy Award-winning television writer for Seinfeld, Ellen, and other shows. He brings his signature storytelling abilities and light touch to his Nil Shapiro series, which begins with Gone to Dust. He lives in Minnesota with his wife, 2 dogs, 2 cats, and whichever children happen to be around. Cindy currently works part-time at Murder by the Book and regularly speaks to book clubs and women's groups about her favorite reads and book suggestions. She's a voracious reader and a book reviewer who administers a Bookstagram account at Thoughts from a Page, where she talks about all things book-related. Cindy Burnett shares her thoughts in her weekly Page Turners column in the Buzz magazines. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below. I'm going to go away right now, and I'll be monitoring the comments and be back later with those. So enjoy this talk. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
So, hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Well,
how are you doing?
I'm doing well too, and I'm very excited to be here with you because this is one of my favorite series. I always recommend it when I'm at the bookstore to people, and
thank you.
I think it's unique and clever and really funny, you know, when it's supposed to be, and I just love it. So I'm glad that you've continued to write it.
Oh, thanks, and thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell me a little bit about this one, Dead West.
Dead West is the 4th in the series, the Nil Shapiro series. He's a private investigator based in Minneapolis, and the first 3 books have all been taken place in Minnesota, and they're quite Minnesotan, so much so that when the book went out for foreign publication, Norway and Sweden passed because they said my books were too Scandinavian. But I have spent a lot of my career writing television as well. And I lived in Los Angeles full-time for 20 years and another 10 back and forth. And I always felt like an outsider there. And I always felt like a Midwesterner who just happened to be visiting. And so I wanted to write a story to take Nils, my Midwestern character, and put him out in that world and show Los Angeles and show business through his eyes.
Well, and I love that because definitely he felt like an outsider. And I think I loved the way you drafted that. You know, LA was such a surprise to him, I think, compared to Minneapolis. Yeah.
And something I should have said also, the reason he goes out is because a elderly, wealthy couple living in St. Paul, their grandson gets his trust fund. And he's moved out there and they're concerned he's blowing his millions investing in show business. So they send him out there to see what's going on. And, you know, I didn't even expect this when I started to write it, but I realized it once I got him out there. You know, in Minnesota, there's something called Minnesota Nice, but it's just a way of social interaction. And a tough talking, head bashing PI character here wouldn't get very far. People wouldn't cooperate. They wouldn't tell their stories. They wouldn't share information. So that's the style he's developed working in Minnesota. But when he gets out to LA, he finds that doesn't work very well. He's not very well respected. And so he has to get a little more devious and heavy-handed to do his job.
Well, I thought that was interesting. And I guess you've talked about it a little bit, but what made you decide? So you've done 3 in Minnesota. So did you just decide a nice change of pace or what drew you to LA? I mean, you said a little bit, but I mean, it's a big change.
Yeah, it was. It is. I made a conscious decision not to write a series based in Los Angeles. And the biggest reason I made that decision is it's been done so well by writers for, almost 100 years. There are really wonderful books set in Minnesota as well that are done, but they're not Raymond Chandler, they're not Dashiell Hammett, they're not Mosley, you know, they're not all these great authors. so that's why I did it. But I wanted to send him out there, especially since I wanted to tell, for anybody who's familiar with my series, I advance Nils's personal life from book to book. It's not the same old, he's a single tough guy, he falls in love with a great woman during the story, they break up at the end of it, and he moves on to the next one, the next book. I wanted to make him a more modern man, or at least try to be a more emotionally intelligent human being. So his life is getting to a place where he finally has something to live for other than himself. And so I wanted to put him in a dangerous situation in Los Angeles. Seemed like a really good place to do that.
Well, that was actually one of my questions was, why you decided to kind of balance his personal life and the professional life. I really like that. I do think it is more modern and much less stereotypical, I guess is the right word. But I like that you spend time on his private life and that it does advance and we're still seeing some of the same characters.
Yeah, I mean, I learned quite a few things from television that apply to book writing. And the biggest thing is that people mostly care about the characters. It's, I worked on Seinfeld. I was a young writer, baby writer there. I was lucky to be there. But I learned an important lesson that if you invest people in your characters, and if people think about that TV show, back in the beginning, they were not all off on their own story. They were all together waiting at a table for a Chinese restaurant or looking for a car in a parking garage. And you really got to know them in response to one another. And then years later, you could have one character say he's a marine biologist and another character could hit a golf ball into the ocean. It lands in a whale spout. The whale washes up on shore and someone says, "Is there a marine biologist here?" But you're so invested in those characters, you don't think that's stupid. You're just like, you like that because those characters are your friends and you want to you love their behavior. And it's kind of an ultimate expression of it. So it was really important to me in these books and others that I am writing, that it's about the characters. That's what I want readers to invest in.
Well, and I think the other strength, because I agree with you, your character development and feeling invested in those characters and liking Shap so much, but also your sense of place. I mean, that's what drew me to the series in the first place when I was reading the first one, was I felt like I was in Minneapolis and I loved learning all about the Scandinavian culture and the food and just all of that. And I felt like you transported that very well to LA also.
Oh, thank you. It's a big question I get in Minnesota because the Minnesotans, of course, like it because they're flattered that I'm writing about it, but they say, does anyone else get it? And in fact, I think more people outside of Minnesota appreciate the sense of place. And when the book gets recognized for things, the books do, it usually comes from somewhere else rather than in Minnesota. Yeah.
Well, and where did the idea for Shap come from in the beginning? Like, how did you create him in the beginning?
Well, it wasn't a very conscious process. I worked in television comedy forever. I'll try to make this short.
Oh,
when the TV dramas got very good, back when The Sopranos and The Wire and Mad Men and Breaking Bad and shows like The Closer on network, The Good Wife, these shows, TV drama got really good and it changed Hollywood because it had always been movies were where you wanted to be. That was the prestige work. And if you couldn't work in movies, you'd work in TV. But when those dramas came out, they became the it thing and the cool thing. And in Hollywood, when something becomes cool, everybody tries to copy it. And unfortunately, the executives who worked in comedy thought, we're going to make comedy cool. But comedy is really not cool. It's about those embarrassing traits we have but they make us very human. And so when they tried to make comedy cool, to me, it felt less human. And I thought, I'm going to work in drama. And to research that, I started reading crime fiction. I've always been a huge reader, but I hadn't read crime fiction before. And I just fell in love with it because when you have a crime driving your plot, your characters don't have to carry the whole weight of the story. Someone calls and says, we got the fingerprints off the gun, or whatever happens. And it frees up your characters to just be people. And I loved that. So I just started devouring the genre. And I was splitting my time between Minneapolis and Los Angeles. And it was January of 2015. I was in Minneapolis. Both of my kids had just gone back for their second semesters of college. I knew I was going to start on a television show in May. And I thought, after reading all these books, I think I'm just going to write a book instead of, and that's what I did. I sat down and wrote Gone to Dust. And I'd always wanted to write books, but I think I'd held books on such a pedestal, I was almost afraid to. I waited till I was a little older. And once I did that, there was no looking back for me. I just loved it. And so Shap comes from, he's not me. He doesn't have my life. That's not my love life. That's not my marital status. I'm not as brave as he is. I'm not as quick in the moment as he is, but he has my voice. And so when I read Raymond Chandler, which I also am embarrassed to say I read very late, when I read Philip Marlowe narrating a story with a comedic voice, with a lot of social observation, but with a dark story, I thought, oh, that's how I can use my experience as a comedy writer to tell one of these kinds of stories that I've now fallen in love with. Yeah.
Well, do you have a favorite of the series? Is there a particular book in the series that kind of resonates the most with you?
Well, it's always the most recent one. I really like what's going on in Neil's personal life here, and I think it's one of the more introspective. I mean, they're all a bit introspective for him, but I think this one, without giving anything away, toward the end, he gets in a situation where he is able to narrate some things differently, and so there's bits and pieces of each book that I like the best. I think the crime in Gone to Dust is my favorite crime that I've come up with, and I really like the small town in Broken Ice. In The Shallows, there's one character who's not a very big character in the story. She is a secretary at a law firm, a receptionist, and I really love that character a lot. So there's bits and pieces of each one, but I'm trying to grow the character and grow myself as a writer, so I'm not writing the same exact book time after time.
Well, that was going to be my next question. If you had either a favorite character or a favorite character to write.
Well, I like Nils, of course. There's a character named Jameson White, who's this big 6'7" ex-football player, and Nils meets him in Broken Ice because Jameson is now he played Canadian football, and now he's a nurse practitioner. And when Nils gets injured, Jameson is hired to kind of follow Nils around to make sure he takes his medicine, cleans his bandages. And that relationship, these two guys who never would have met each other, I really adore that character. And readers seem to really respond to, and we're very happy to see that he's back in Dead West, although he's starting the story in a tougher place because he's gone through a kind of a personal tragedy or community tragedy that he was involved with. Yeah.
I like him, and I was very happy to see him in Dead West, though he is going through a tougher thing. And I thought that was an interesting thing to bring in to the storyline, but I don't want to give anything away on that if you don't.
Yeah. I felt, yeah, we find this out in the first chapter, I think, so I don't mind giving it away, that he's a trauma nurse, Jameson is, and there was a shooting at a grade school, and he was working in the ER when all these kids were brought in. So I knew that people really liked that character, so I felt it was okay to start him in that place because I knew people would really be rooting for him to come through it. Also, he played his college ball at UCLA, which I had established in another book, which worked out like I was not master planning this, but it worked out great because Nils has never been to Los Angeles, and he needs somebody who knows the city. So he brings Jameson with him, not only as a tour guide, but also in the hopes that a change of scenery will be good for Jameson's mental health.
Well, and that worked out perfectly because he was such a great navigator through LA for Shap.
Yeah.
So I liked that.
Yeah, and then it gave me, I always had to remember Nils had never been there before. So I had to have him describe it as a person who's never been there before, even though I knew exactly what was going on because I've spent a lot of time there. But I could give some of that point of view to Jameson.
Yeah, I liked that. I thought that was a good way to do it. So do you have a standard writing regime? Do you write 2,000 words a day? Do you sit in the same place? Do you just write when you have time? How does that work for you?
I'm an early morning writer on all those books. I would get up in the 4 o'clock-ish area. Most of those were written while I was working full-time on a television show. Dead West is the first one that wasn't. And I mean, Gone to Dust, I started when I had that period of time in Minneapolis, but I finished while I was working on a TV show. And, because of the pandemic, I was not working in TV anymore. And I had made a decision not to go back and forth. It was getting too hard. So I didn't think I'd work in television anymore, but now all the writers' rooms are in Zoom. And so I was asked to come work on a new show on ABC for a couple of months and help the room get going. And so I took a break the last 2 months and did that. And now I'm back in my regular writing routine again.
So your regular writing team, now that you're not working in TV, is it more during the day or do you still get up at 4 a.m. and write?
No, well, I'm trying to get back to 4 a.m. But I'm inching to it. It's such a productive time. I can get more done. Like if I get up that early, I probably don't start working until 4:45 or so because I have to get coffee in me and let it kick in and look at the news and things. And then, but I can get more done before 9 o'clock, just because there's no interruptions and it's a really productive time.
How long does it take you to write your first draft?
I usually write, I start a little bit slower in the beginning. I write like 1,000 words a day, but then I kick up to 1,500 words a day, but I do it 7 days a week. Oh. So there's always a few, I don't outline, so I always hit a couple of snags, but it's about 3 months.
Oh, that's not too bad.
Yeah,
that was going to be my next question, was whether you outlined or whether you just sort of sat down and wrote.
I don't outline. I have worked on almost, maybe more now than 500 episodes of television. I am a firm believer that outlines are worthless. Everybody's got their own process. So whatever works for you, great. But I can't tell you how many times that an outline was revised 2, 3, 5, 6 times before the writers were happy with it. And then it went to the studio and they had notes, and then it went to the network and they had notes, and then everybody thought, yeah, this is great. And then the script is written exactly the way the outline says it should be written, and the script stinks. It just, I don't know why there's that loss there, but when you don't outline, your first draft basically is an outline. So it's kind of just it gets to be semantics at a certain point, but I don't outline. I was just talking to some other writers before this call about a television show that we watched the finale of last night. I was to all book writers, all crime writers. We have a Monday night Zoom, and one of them, Reed Farrell Coleman, for people who know his work, beautifully said, like, when you write toward an ending, all you do is like mangle and mash and twist things into place to try to get to that ending, and it usually results in a very convoluted story. So
sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, it probably puts a
Yeah.
lot of pressure on you that's unnecessary, instead of letting the kind of creativity flow as you continue writing. Instead of saying, I must get here, maybe you go a totally different direction and it works much better.
Yeah, I mean, I've also heard outliners say, if I'm building a bridge, I need to know where it's going to, which makes perfect sense to me. But I need to know that every block, every bit of conversation, every scene, every chapter is organic to those characters. Because if you start writing toward what you want to happen story-wise, sometimes those characters get mushy because you're pushing story before character. And writers can talk about this stuff ad nauseum, but I think character is everything. I think story comes from character. Everything comes from character. And so to do it the other way around doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's funny that you say that, because I interview authors a lot, and I used to ask which comes first, plot or character. And I think almost every single author said character. And after a while, I thought, I think that's probably a silly question, because I think character almost always comes first.
It does, but people have different ways of getting to it and doing it. So, and whatever works for a writer, go with it. There's no one right way to do it, but in TV, people talk about story way more than character, and I don't think it should be that way. But I mean, if my writing advice to people who ask me is, write your characters honestly, make them true to themselves, and don't be boring, and a good story will come up. Don't have a chapter that's boring. So,
well, that's good. That's good advice. A reader doesn't want to read a boring chapter. So I think that, but I would think in TV, you're a little hamstrung by, obviously I've never written TV and you have, but by your time frame. I mean, it's going to be 20 minutes or it's got to be 28 minutes or whatever the time period and in a book, you're not really constrained by that as much.
You're not. You should keep the pace moving, I think, so the reader doesn't put down the book as easily. But you're also constrained in television by having to get everybody literally on the same page, so the thing can be produced. And the studio is investing a lot of money. They need to sign off on it. The network needs to know it's something they want to put on their channel. Like, you need a lot of people to sign off on it, which is another reason I hate outlines, because when someone reads an outline, they get a picture in their head, and it's only natural that people would get different pictures in their head. And so it leads to disappointment because it's not what they expected. It's like they're looking at blueprints, but the thing hasn't been painted yet and decorated and all that. So if you write a script, it's at least more easy to get people seeing the same thing. And what I love about book writing is that's your job as a writer. There's no economy. You don't have to make it 50 pages long or 100 pages long. You can tell the story you want to tell and show the reader what you want to show. And then people tend to get the same picture in their head. And that's another reason why so many people are disappointed when the book is made into a movie. So because somewhere along the process, they go, okay, that's the book. Now let's write a screenplay. And then it turns into work on the screenplay and the original work is left behind. And it leads to something that's, unless the author is powerful enough to be involved, like a J.K. Rowling or Stephen King, there can be a lot of disappointment.
But I think and I agree with that completely. I think when the movie diverges a lot from the book, it's going to be disappointing for everybody. But I even think sometimes when it doesn't, the beauty of reading is the creativity you come up with. Like, I think I know what a character looks like. Someone else thinks the character looks different. I mean, still within the parameters that, you've described the character, but still sometimes you're like, well, that's not how I envisioned it. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. It just depends.
Right. I think it's especially true in crime fiction too, because I think in crime fiction, the good authors like to activate the reader's mind in a trying to figure out what happened or what's going to happen, even more so than in general fiction. So when the reader becomes an active participant in solving the crime, I think that vision even becomes more clear for them.
No, I agree. I also am all about the covers, and I think your covers are fabulous. They're different, but they're very evocative of the particular story. Do you have a say in some of that?
You know what? I don't know because I've never had to raise my voice about it. Forge has done the best job with my covers. I have heard so many authors complain about their covers, and from day one, from the first book, Dead West, they've blown me away. I've been thrilled with my covers. It's a big part of what leads a person to pick up a book or not in a bookstore or a library, and they've done a great job with my covers. The one funny thing to me is the first three have blood splatter on them, but they must have run out of blood because there's no blood on the fourth one. I think because the red wouldn't have looked as good with that sunset cover on Dead
Yeah, it would have been
West.
hard to have that.
Yeah, but they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, they have. They're so different. And so the second I see them, I know it's your book. And I think there's a lot of similarity in some covers and series and, certain things looking the same way. And it's just very refreshing and nice to see something that looks different, but is reflective of the story.
Good, thanks. I will pass that on to them. I'm so happy with the work they've done. Yeah.
I think it's great. Are you working on the next one?
Well, I'm not. I'm going to take a break from Nils for a little bit. I do want to keep writing him, and there is going to be a Nils short story in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine that takes place after Dead West. I will post about that as soon as I know the issue it's going to be published in. But I am going to write a standalone now. I have made a new deal with Forge for 2 more books. So I do know that's going to be the next one. I don't know what the one after that's going to be.
Well,
I do want to write more Nils. So
I was like,
I have.
But what's the standalone about? Do you know yet?
Oh yes, it is. Well, it's about a kind of a middle-aged guy who goes to visit his retired parents down in South Carolina, and his dad has some memory impairment issues, but just short-term memory. And his dad's a talker, and since he can't talk about sports or politics or anything because he can't remember that, he talks about his childhood a lot and growing up in this place, and it triggers a mystery. And then there's a current day mystery, but it's all kind of family based, and nobody's a professional investigator. And it's just a way that I'm using this, I don't want to call it a device, but this fact of some memory impairment where people remember something that happened long ago, and so something gets revealed, and an effort to protect his family, this guy gets involved in finding out what happened.
So it's a dual timeline, something in the past and something in the present?
Yeah, although only I don't go back in the past. I'm not flashing back and forth. It's just finding out what happened back then and what happened now. And there's personal involvement for this guy. Yeah, and it takes place in Beaufort, South Carolina, which is near Hilton Head, that's where Pat Conroy was from. So
right.
His books are set there. It's one of the few towns the Union Army did not destroy on their march south. So it's really beautiful. And there's a lot of colorful landscape there and colorful characters there. It's where my mother's side of the family is from. And so I've spent a lot of time there, and I'm really enjoying that setting.
And I think he has a writing center there, or some kind of literacy center.
I'm sure he does. He did pass away relatively recently, but he was quite involved in the community there and set those big books like The Great Santini and Beach Music and there. So, yeah.
I think his wife has continued operating it, but
oh yeah,
Yeah, so that's neat. I didn't realize there was a Beaufort, South Carolina, and a Beaufort, North Carolina, and they're spelled
Yes,
the same way,
they're
but
spelled
pronounced
exactly the
different.
same
Yeah.
way. Yes.
And I have friends in both. And so I was so confused at first because I was like, why are they, and I was trying to get it all together. And then that's when the friend from Beaufort was explaining to me that he had the writing center and that it was the same man even, but they just pronounce it differently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do pronounce it differently, but the Carolinas are stunning, beautiful place.
Yeah. So can I ask you about your Emmy or Emmys? I'm not sure.
You can have one Emmy. Everybody thinks I won it for Seinfeld, but I didn't. I actually have worked on two family shows and one kid show. And the kid show was on Disney called The Wizards of Waverly Place.
Oh,
And
my kids love that show.
yeah, people, it's, if you think if you worked on a show like Seinfeld, that would be what people would be most excited about. But Wizards of Waverly Place touched a lot of people, and that's what I won the Emmy for.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait to tell. I have 3 teenagers. They're 19, 17, and 14. And they watched the show a long time ago. But they loved it. And I watched it with them a lot because it would be on and the movie, all of that. So they'll be very excited when I tell them that.
Yeah, it was, that show, Peter Murrieta is the guy who ran that show. We all came from prime time. It was kind of when reality TV was taking over and there was all the sitcom work went away. So a bunch of primetime writers moved over and we really wanted to make that show good. We all thought some of the other Disney shows weren't very good. And boy, every day was a fight with Disney to make it good. And people say, oh, maybe you shouldn't talk that way about Disney. Maybe you'll burn a bridge with them. But I am telling you, I am not only happy to burn the bridge, I will rebuild it so I can burn it again. It's it's just the Disney Channel, not the, but things I'm sure have changed there lately. And I think Wizards, from what I've heard, is one of the reasons they've changed. That character that Selena Gomez played, Proud Texan, Alex Russo, was a real fight to have that character get on the air. But now I've heard they're trying to embrace characters like her more.
Oh, that's great. Because, I thought much better than a lot of the others because I would have to end up watching them, when they were on and we were all in the same room. And it was definitely my favorite. So that's exciting.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Well, and there's been such a shift in TV, and I don't know, maybe the last 2 years, but with all these new networks and I guess they're not even called networks, but all these streaming apps and things, it's been a big change. So it's, I'm sure it's interesting to watch it from your perspective.
Yeah, there's more places for more voices. There's, I think, more opportunity to do good work. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's great for viewers. They have so many more choices. It's a little, I'm sure those of us who are old enough to remember appointment television when there were 3 or 4 networks and there were a few hit shows that everybody watched and everybody talked about the next day and you had to wait a whole week for it. And people made a point of gathering on those evenings. There's a little bit of that in some of the shows. But as a whole, it's too bad some of that is gone. But we have a more diverse community now, and we have more voices that should be heard, and more people whose stories should be reflected on TV. So that's a good thing.
No, I agree completely. It's just every once in a while, it's a little daunting when you're trying to find a new show to start and there's like 20 places you can watch stuff. I have to spend all this time Googling best new shows and until I can find something that my husband and I will want to watch.
And it's not even American shows that we're choosing from, especially in the crime drama, the Northern Europeans, the Danes and the English and the French their shows are fantastic. Yeah.
That's true. So you talked about reading crime fiction a while ago and that got you started on this. What do you read these days? What have you read recently that you liked?
Well, because I started crime fiction so late, I just tried to catch up, which is impossible. But so now I'm reading a mix of regular fiction and crime fiction. I read nonfiction book a year. But what I've read most recently, Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby, which I loved. I read Michael Wiley's, he has this really interesting character who has disinhibition because he was shot in the head. So he's a PI who can only tell the truth. His book is Lucky Bones, which is very noirish and interesting. I wouldn't say it's crime fiction, although it kind of is. It starts with somebody shooting somebody. So I guess there's a little bit of that. Deacon King Kong by James McBride, I absolutely loved. And I can't even remember what, because of the pandemic, I don't know if it was earlier this year or last year that I read The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, and I really loved that book. So in this moment, I'm reading Commonwealth.
Oh, I liked Commonwealth a lot. I haven't read The House, but I liked Commonwealth a lot.
What I've read so far, I like quite a bit. Yeah.
So what's it been like pushing a book out into the world in the middle of the pandemic?
The book was originally supposed to publish June 2nd, which was why it was a publisher's weekly pick of the week in June instead of August when it came out. But I think Forge wisely pushed it to last week. And I thought it was going to be kind of non-existent, that it would just be plopped out there and whoever would find it would find it. But these types of events have been quite effective in reaching readers. And I don't know what the new normal, or if normal will ever exist again, but it sure would be. I know some bookstores have done it. It would be nice if all these things were, listen, I really want to get back in bookstores and libraries and book clubs and meet readers face to face. For someone who's highly introverted, I quite enjoy that. But these things can be watched by people all over the world, and that's really nice. So promoting things on social media, readers can find their favorite authors and hear them speak like this and ask them questions. It's been nice.
I do think a silver lining of the pandemic has been everybody learning Zoom and Facebook Live and all these different things, and you are reaching so many more people. So hopefully when we return to whatever normal is going to be, there'll be some hybrid, in person and some of these, because everybody's learned to do it. There's certainly no reason that it has to.
Yeah, and it's true in my personal life as well. Like we have these mystery writing conventions. There's 2 or 3 or 1 event a year, depending on what you go to. And the mystery writing community is quite close. And I think that's because from the top down, it's a very welcoming environment. And there's this feeling if one book does well, that it's good for all of us. And I think that's very true. And you develop these great friendships with people, but you'd only see them once in a while. But now with Zoom and things, I'm more in contact. And that's been a real silver lining. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think, hopefully some of that will continue. And I do think it's brought more people together, and so many more people can learn about your book. And I always think, because I host literary salons here in Houston, that when you meet an author and you hear about their book, you're much more likely to read it and to engage with it and then to look for your next book,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and again, I've only been a published author for 3 years. So I'm no expert, but I seem to have come in the time when Amazon had done its thing and the bookstores were struggling, but then the bookstores were figuring out, personal events, having events, which really connects readers with authors, is the way to go. And so I think it's really effective. And then your independent bookseller, they know you, they can recommend the right book for you. It's a great relationship. So it's nice to see that now get into the digital world through Zoom.
No, I agree. And I think, on top of it, the whole buy local movement kind of surged at the same time with Amazon
Yeah.
impacting other businesses as well. And I think that's
Yes.
been great because I definitely think it's brought people back around to a lot of independent bookstores, which are, my favorite, but all
Yes.
sorts of things.
Yeah. There's nothing better than the smell of a bookstore.
No, I
I
agree.
was
It's
in,
neat to look
I,
around.
I was in the, there's a Minnesota Murder by the Book called Once Upon a Crime, which is our little crime bookstore here. And I was just in there signing stock, and only a few people can be allowed in the store at a time. But a couple of people walked in, and the first thing they said was, "I love the smell of the store." Yeah.
Well, and I just love walking around and, well, in pre-pandemic times, touching all the books, not
Yeah.
now. And,
Yes.
just looking at them all and browsing, and you just can't do that online. So it's nice when you can just be
Yeah.
looking through them all.
So it's great. I think people had a hard time, and maybe still do, concentrating during the pandemic. There's so much unknown. Now we have a whole new round of that with back to school. But a lot of people have found comfort in reading, or maybe audio or whatever they're doing. But so I think, like everybody, it was an initial shock, but people are finding their way and getting into, maybe new, maybe old, but they're getting into routines. Yeah.
I think it was a huge adjustment. But definitely for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was struggling to focus on anything but just
Yeah.
constantly watching the news. But I think
Right.
everybody kind of settled and realized this is going to be longer than we were envisioning. And so then you just kind of settle in.
Yes.
There's
I'm
McKenna.
back.
Hello, McKenna.
Speaking of your friendly local bookseller, I'm back. One who is at the store every day smelling the store, but we still have no one coming in. We are happy to take orders over the phone and touch all the books for you. But for now, we're still closed. I can't wait for the day when customers can come back in safely. I wanted to mention, if you're just tuning in and you missed the beginning of this talk, as soon as we're done with this, Facebook will post the video from the beginning, so you can just rewatch anything you missed. Also, I'll get it uploaded to YouTube later this evening or tomorrow, so it'll be able to be shared that way in a little bit. If you too are interested in the books by S.A. Cosby or Deacon King Kong, we are big fans of those. We did an event with S.A. Cosby, Sean Cosby, a little while ago. We're trying to get more signed book plates because the book sold extremely well, but he'll also be in conversation with David Joy, who is wonderful, coming up, I think, next week. And we do have signed copies of Deacon King Kong, just a couple left, but that's pretty cool. So you have a very, very quiet comment base here. Everyone's watching and no one has any questions. So I think that we're probably just going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'm gonna take that to mean that Cindy asked all the correct questions that people cared about.
Great, well done, Cindy.
Yes, exactly. I also dropped a link if you have any interest in the literary salons that Cindy was talking about. I've linked to cfapage.net, which is her Conversations from a Page website. And of course, I've got the link in there to order Matt Goldman's books. All of them are listed on the event page. So whether you want to start with the first in paperback or the new one, they're on there. And we're expecting signed book plates any day, I believe, right? You sent some signed book plates?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay, perfect. We haven't gotten them yet, but we do have them, and they're ready for any orders. So for now, I guess we'll say good night. I'll be back here tomorrow night with T. Jefferson Parker and Glenn Eric Hamilton at 7 o'clock for another virtual author event. And thank you so much to Cindy and Matt Goldman and Forge for helping coordinate this. We really appreciate that. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Good night. Thank you very much, Cindy and McKenna. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.